So with the Chinese economy, the growth slowing down, and this saying like if the US sneezes, the world catches a cold. Well,
Right.
China's economy is so big now, like arguably it could be the biggest economy or the second largest economy in the world. So
Right.
with the Chinese growth slowing, how will that impact the rest of the world?
I think that China's economy definitely has slowed down. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But I think what's interesting is you're actually seeing the Chinese government starting to release a stimulus now, and to
Right.
revive that economy. What's interesting here is that up until this point, even throughout all of COVID and all of these years, China's never did a stimulus. So a lot of people are being critical, saying, "Oh, look at China, they have to do a stimulus." Well, the United States, we did massive stimuluses. The quantitative easing, right? The quantitative easing. I mean, as a U.S. citizen, I got two checks. I think I got two checks of $2,400 from the United States
Wow.
government. As a like, go spend money, go. We stimulate the economy. Here's $2,400 for being American. Now go spend it somewhere. And so, the United States spent trillions of dollars on quantitative easing and printing money and flooding these markets with stimulus to revive this economy. So it's kind of funny. On one end, you hear like, oh, China's struggling, they have to do a stimulus. Well, we were struggling and we did the same thing. So it's just China's done it 4 years later. So we've already started to see that trying to trickle in. Reports just came out earlier this week. We're kind of mid-November when we're recording this, but this new stimulus package is already the retail numbers are up this month from last month. There's been an increase in spending, and I think what you're seeing in the Chinese economy is again it's more of a maturing. Right. Is again, there's a lot of, the high end, for example, the high end spending, the Louis Vuitton, the Gucci's, these high end luxury brands, they're not selling like they used to. Right. China used to be their number one destination in the world. People used to be buying these crazy expensive handbags, left, right, and center. But now that market has matured a lot, and people aren't spending on that. But what they are doing is, when you go to China now, the restaurant scene is booming. There is every single night. Restaurants are packed and filled, and it's kind of like a quiet luxury in a sense, where it's like, hey, we're not going to buy that $3,000 handbag anymore, but you know what? We'll go treat ourselves for dinner. Let's splurge a little bit and go have a nice dinner with some friends, and maybe spend $20-$30 on a meal, which would be quite a lot in China. When maybe an average meal is 10 or less. So yeah, I think what's really interesting is going back to your question, how is this going to affect the world? I think that it's going to affect it in the sense that we're all interconnected with China. Like you said, it is a major economy. It really is, I would say, the heartbeat of the world, much more than America, just because no matter where you are, I can go through your house and we can look at all of the electronics, all of the things that you need. All of this is coming from China. The equipment we're using to record this video would not be possible if it were not for China. So, China definitely has that influence. But at the end of the day, I think if we can still find ways to work together, I think is really going to be the answer to that. And, and it really is depending on if the U.S. wants to participate or not. Because like you said, in Panama or in South America, Chinese EVs are coming in. I mean, they're open for business and they're going to do that. So the interesting thing is, again, as somebody also that's in the market, I look for opportunities. So you do see certain industries in China that are doing really well. The EV one being one of them. Certainly AI, anything like that is still, a lot of robust growth for the future.
Yeah, no. And it's not even just the EVs, like it's all their vehicles across the range. Like you see all their gas cars selling like crazy here. And the funny thing is, if you would have gone back like 4 or 5 years and looked in Panama and Mexico and places like that, the amount of Chinese vehicles on the road, it would have been like zero.
Right.
And now it's like nearly half, and it's just getting more and more and more and more. And like the quality is there. I mean, we actually own a Chinese vehicle, so I'm a little bit biased. I'll put my hand up and say that. But I absolutely love the car, and the engine's Mitsubishi, the transmission's Mitsubishi. So, they do outsource. They don't have the manufacturing capabilities or whatever it is. They outsource it to the big, larger brands, but the quality is not compromised. Like, it's just crazy how inexpensive they are as well. And again, it's not just even their cars, it's like everything that's taking over here. And it feels like
Absolutely.
more of a free market.
Well, it is. And I think what's interesting, Luke, I live in Las Vegas, and every year, the first week of January is the Consumer Electronics Show. And every year I make a video from the Consumer Electronics Show talking about China and its relationship with, this industry, which is electronics. This CES, as we call it, is the largest consumer electronics, it's the largest electronics show in the world.
Huge.
It's massive, massive. And what was so fascinating, I did a video last January, and we're talking, for example, Hisense, which is a producer of a TV. Their market is growing tremendously. I mean, they have such a that's a very saturated market. I want to compete on TVs. Okay, well, good luck. You got to go against LG, Sony, all of these legacy brands that have tremendous market presence. But Hisense is doing it. And they sponsored the UEFA football tournament or soccer tournament. So they've got a big presence in Europe because of that sponsorship. And they had an amazing booth. And I talked to one of the sales guys who just said, yeah, we're crushing results. People want this technology. And the funny thing is that consumers want the best deal. Like you said, it's as simple as that. They're not going to care that if it comes from China or not. And in many ways, what's interesting is that people are actually starting to seek out Chinese products because of the quality. This is a very different thing. And this is something that your viewers might find very interesting. In 2007, when I first went to China, nobody would think of buying a Chinese car. That's unheard of. Because everything was any brand, no matter what you bought. If you bought kitchen knives, if you bought a cell phone, a car, clothing, shoes, whatever you bought, you did not want to buy a Chinese brand, right? You wanted to buy international because international was higher quality. And then when you go to, for example, if it's kitchenware, you're usually going to try to buy from Japan or Germany because those are really high. They're known for their high quality. So I remember very distinctly, being in a Chinese supermarket and in 2007-8, and I'm a young guy in my career, and I needed to buy a TV, and the Chinese consumers were going to the Sony, trying to buy the Japanese one because it was better quality. And I'm like, well, geez, this Chinese one's really cheap. Like I'm kind of want to save some money. I'm just going to buy the Chinese version. And that has been completely flipped. So now Chinese consumers will go to the Chinese because they know the quality is great now. From 2007 to now, that quality has improved tremendously. And you see that firsthand with the EVs. Legacy automakers in China. This is probably one of the most fascinating stories ever. Again, 2007, 2008, these companies are making billions in China. It was basically a cash cow. And at one point, kind of 08, 09, they're saying, China is our forever cash cow. We can basically kind of close our eyes. We just import a lot of cars. They're all going to sell out. We're going to make billions. We're going to get a big cut. Let's take our bonuses and go somewhere on holiday and let's call it a year. Great year. That has shifted. People are not buying those cars anymore. And the reality is that 50% of the cars now being sold, over 50%, are Chinese EVs. And the Ford CEO, Jim Farley, he went to China this summer. He was so impressed with the Xiaomi SUV that he bought it, loaded it on a cargo plane, shipped Shanghai to Detroit, and for the last 6 months has been driving around his Xiaomi SUV as the Ford CEO. He did a podcast where he revealed that. And I got the clip of it and I used it in a video. And it's like, wow, and he goes, guys, I can't give it up. I absolutely love this car. Like, it's a fantastic car. So what better advertisement and what better, recommendation when you've got the CEO of Ford? Not only is he buying a competitor's vehicle, he's buying a Chinese one. He's gone to the effort of shipping that all across the world just so that he could drive it in Detroit. That is a pretty remarkable story in itself. And so it really immediately, dispels the myth of, Chinese EVs are crap or they're bad quality or this. If this Ford CEO is going to go to that effort to drive it back in the US, I think that's all we need to hear about as far as Chinese quality.
Yeah, I totally agree. When I was shopping around for like split air conditioners, I was talking to people in our neighborhood and I was saying, what do you have? What do you like about it? And everyone has Hisense. So Hisense have took over the air conditioning market from LG because they're like a quarter of the price. And most people are like, well, if it breaks, I'm just going to go out and buy a new one. I don't have to deal with the hassle of the LG because they come with long warranties. The LG is like 10 years, but it's it's dealing with the hassle of actually trying to get somebody out to fix it, whatnot, and the logistics. So everyone's buying these Hisense. But what I keep thinking is like, okay, so here all these Chinese brands are taking over, and that's great for the Chinese economy. But how's that going to affect like all these American companies and all these other companies that are losing market share rapidly? So how do you think that's going to kind of affect?
Well, I think it's going to force people to adapt. I mean, because you're going to have to either create better products, that have a competitive advantage.
This video was powered by ExpressVPN, helping you protect your privacy with the world's fastest VPN and the VPN that I use. If you want to take advantage of my special offer, go to expressvpn.com/marketmania. Let's get back to it.
Or you're going to have to work with Chinese companies and embrace that technology. Now, if you're interested in learning more about the auto industry and specifically the Chinese auto industry, there's a great guy on Twitter named Michael Dunn who runs a website. I believe it's like Dunn Auto Insights. And so you can just look him up on Twitter or Google. You can find him. But he has a lot of great analysis. And one of his things was saying, there's no way that Trump is going to remove these 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs. He's also not going to allow Mexico to be a backdoor. For example, if a Chinese EV sets up a factory in Mexico and then just, flings it over the border, that's not going to happen either. But one of the things that Trump might be willing to do is if they do a joint venture, let's just say like a 51-49 joint venture where, a Chinese EV partners with an American company. And let's just say, for example, Ford, maybe this is Ford's opportunity to really become a dominant player in the EV space in the United States. The Ford CEO already likes, the Chinese EVs, but let's imagine that they do a joint venture where it says, look, we want you to build a factory in Detroit. Okay, we're going to build these Chinese engineered cars, but what we're going to do is we're going to split the profits. We want you to you're going to build a brand new factory here in Detroit. You're going to hire American workers to do the job. We're going to structure it at this price point, and we're basically going to create a win-win solution. That way that you can get access to this North American market, but that we're also benefiting as well. We're creating local jobs for Americans. Ford is getting our part of the profit, and we're sharing in this. But that would be a great example of saying, look, I'm not going to turn away China or try to stop their growth. China is the future of EVs. There's no other country that's going to be the future of EVs. The EV industry will be dominated by China in the future. So if you want to participate in the EV industry, you're going to have to do a deal with China in some capacity, whether it's doing a deal with CATL, which is the number one battery producer of EVs in the world. Maybe you do a deal with them. Maybe you do a deal with one of the Chinese EV companies directly. But it's finding a way like that to work. I think that would be a really smart decision. That's what I'm certainly would be an advocate for. And if I was one of these, auto executives, I would be looking into that, saying, how can we benefit from China? What do they bring to the table? A lot. They bring a lot of innovation, they bring a cost savings, and they bring the knowledge, and they could transform that, and it could be an amazing partnership.
I think you're right there, and I hope that really happens. And I just want to touch on one last thing before we wrap up here. We got talking about China so much. I forgot I wanted to talk about this with you. Is like you talk a lot about on your channel about the world geopolitics and things like that, which I don't talk about on my channel. I just tend to stay away from it. But how do you see the world right now? Like with Trump now coming into power, do you see like the likelihood of World War III is now dropping? And what do you kind of think with everything that's going on around the world?
Yeah, I definitely think that the likelihood of war has been reduced with Trump coming in. I don't think that Trump is a warmonger. I don't think that he wants to fight wars. Now, there's certain things that are interesting because it depends on which war you're talking about. I think in many ways, I think Trump is he's definitely more pro-Israel than any other candidate. He's a very, very, very big staunch supporter of Israel. Remember, for those of you that know this, he moved the capital, to Jerusalem, which is very controversial, as Jerusalem is caught right in the middle of this conflict as well, and both sides claiming part of the city as their capital. So Trump is very, very pro-Israel. So I believe, for example, the biggest source of tension for the future is going to be the Middle East and how Israel and the United States are really, they're very very much linked at the hip, but unfortunately, both Israel and the United States are being isolated on the international stage over this, unfortunate situation in Gaza, and in a war that really is going to be very difficult for Netanyahu to win. Now, that being said, if we flip conflicts and you look at a very, very difference, it's a complete 180 difference between what Harris would have done, Kamala Harris, and what Donald Trump would do in regards to Ukraine, for example. If Kamala would have won the election, she would have doubled down on what Biden does. She would have doubled down more spending, more weapons to Ukraine, more billions and billions of dollars to Ukraine, and doing anything you can to tremendously more lives lost. And it would just be a continuation. We would know that would continue for 4 more years of just this constant fighting. But I think with Trump, he wants to end that. And let's be honest, the European economy is absolutely hammered right now. Germany is in total chaos right now. Look at that coalition government has completely failed. The finance minister has been sacked. They're basically running it. They have 0 GDP growth right now. They're looking at a full-on recession, and it's because their whole industry was built on cheap Russian oil and gas, and they don't have access to that anymore. And it's been a disaster for Germany, which is the economic powerhouse of the EU. And so I think, I know for many Europeans, and definitely I can speak for many Americans, they are tired of this conflict. Why do we keep sending hundreds of billions of dollars to Ukraine? At the end of the day, we need to figure out a border. We need to figure out a border. We need to figure out a resolution, and we need to move on from this conflict because it affects everything. It affects everything. And again, it's that global economy that we talk about. Yes, Russia and Ukraine is definitely affecting a lot of industries around the world, but certainly Europe. All of Europe is really getting tied up in this. So I do think that, I do feel optimistic on a Trump presidency as far as, in relation to, is World War III closer or further away? I think it's further away. I think that Trump,
good.
Let's be honest as well. Trump, as hard as Trump wants to be on China, he's also a businessman, and he has done a tremendous amount of deals with China. I think that China actually preferred Donald Trump in the White House. If they had the choice between the two, they preferred Trump, and they're not afraid of Trump. And I think that he's going to have some discussions with Xi Jinping, the Chinese president. He's certainly going to have some discussions with Vladimir Putin. And he's famously said that he's going to end the Russia-Ukraine war before he takes office on January 20th. There has already been a plan that has been reported by the Telegraph, for example, that he's going to create an 800-mile demilitarization zone, basically separating Ukraine and Russia. On the east side of that would be these 4 territories that essentially the entire war has been fought over. Those would be annexed over to Russia, and essentially a new border would be drawn, and it would be monitored, and along with a guarantee that Ukraine would not join NATO for the next 20 years. That's the deal. That's the first plan that has been proposed at this stage in the game. Now, do we see Ukraine accepting that? Well, if Trump is president, which he will become on January 20th, I don't think he's going to get any more aid from the United States government. I think Trump will end that, and I think it will force Zelensky to negotiate. And at this point, something has to give. This cannot continue on forever. So I think once that war comes to a conclusion, I think it will be much better for Europe. I think it'll be better for the world. And the only conflict that I'm really worried about, Luke, is really the Middle East with Israel. I think that's really the hot zone. I don't think the United States and China are going to get into a war. They're too smart. They're not stupid. Both leaders of both countries know that the U.S. and China economies are too important for the world. So I think that's really, really important as well, that people need to be understanding and knowledgeable of that. So long answer to your question, but I'm optimistic for the future.
That's really good. And if you want to learn more about this kind of stuff, then head over to Cyrus's channel here. He puts some amazing stuff out, and all the stuff he's covering here, just fantastic on geopolitics, China, all these things. Just really, really great channel that you've got there, Cyrus.
Cheers.
Thank you so much for spending the time with me today. And are there any final words of wisdom or anything you want to say before we wrap it up?
Luke, I want to say thank you for inviting me to your channel. It's been a pleasure. I love chatting about this stuff, and I follow it closely because, this is the stuff that moves our markets. I know that you're heavily involved in the market. That's the main focus of your channel, but, follow geopolitics because it changes, it changes the market, and it changes and it influences things. And I guess the main thing is if I'd like people to get to know China more, and I'd like you to question everything from the media. If you can, go to China yourself, because I guarantee the China you experience will be nothing like what Western media presents to you. And it's important to, don't just watch my videos. Don't just say, hey, I'm going to watch Cyrus for the best view on China. Watch everybody's and then go and experience it for yourself. And that's really for every country. Go experience the world. And last message. Just be kind, just be a good person, and let's all learn to work together.
Great advice. I love those final words. All right. Thank you so much, Cyrus, for spending this time, and hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Absolutely. Thanks, Luke. Appreciate you.
And if you wanted to see this in full and not in the 2-part series, then you can go to the podcast channel, which will also be linked below, where you can get access to this video in full. All these podcast videos are posted there first. I will see you guys in the next one.